Welcome to Best Ever, the show where we explore how effective self-management creates the foundation for positive leadership outcomes. I'm Scott Eblin, and in every episode, I sit down with notable leaders to uncover the routines, mindset shifts, and strategies that have helped them lead at the highest level, and the difference that's made for their organizations, families, and communities. Today on Best Ever, I'm joined by Muriel Wilkins, executive coach, C-suite advisor, and the CEO and founder of Paribus Partners. You may know her as the host of the acclaimed Coaching Real Leaders podcast from Harvard Business Review, or as the co-author of Own the Room, Discover Your Signature Voice to Master Your Leadership Presence. Muriel's latest book, coming out in October 2025, is Leadership Unblocked, Break Through the Beliefs That Limit Your Potential, a deep dive into the internal barriers that keep high performers from leading with ease. A former executive herself, Muriel has spent more than 2 decades coaching senior executives through their most complex leadership challenges. Today, we're going to explore the inner work that makes outer leadership possible and the self-management practices that help Muriel show up at her best. And listeners, be advised, when you get 2 executive coaches talking with each other, it can get deep in a hurry. Muriel, thanks so much for taking the time to talk with me on Best Ever.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I was 4 cohorts ahead of you at Georgetown. I was cohort 6, and I think the last I saw, they're like on 85 or 86 or something on cohorts. It's crazy.
Wow.
Yeah. So,
Totally.
yeah, you and I have both been executive coaches a long time, over 20 years for each of us. And I want to start with your professional origin story prior to the Georgetown cohort 10. Like, what were you doing before you started coaching all those years ago? And like, what was the spark in your professional life or experience that led you to say, I'm going to be an executive coach? Because not many people 20 plus years ago were saying that, right? Everybody's saying that now, but back then it was kind of a weird thing to say. I said it, you said it. What made you say that back then?
Yeah. So, I mean, to be honest, if you had told me, I think I'm at my 35th, no more than my 35th MBA reunion, I was at HBS, that this is what I would be doing, or anything even closely related to leadership development, I would have laughed in your face.
HBS
Harvard
for
Business School.
the people at home is Harvard Business School. Okay.
That's right.
Yeah,
so, in fact, my leadership professor there, his name is Jack Gabbaro, wrote one of the best HBR articles ever, I think, around how to manage your boss. I sent him an apology email years later saying, I wish I'd paid more attention in your class. And guess what I'm doing now? So when I came out of business school, I mean, I followed a pretty classic route. I wanted to, my aspiration had been to be at a C-suite level one day, potentially a chief marketing officer, chief strategy officer, and I was well on my way. I was doing very, very well. Sort of classic story of getting promoted very quickly, accelerated. And then I found myself in a very senior leadership role, reporting to the CEO. And boy, it was challenging. I was successful in terms of business terms. I was getting the business results, but man, was I suffering through it. And a lot of that frustration led me to look for a coach, quite frankly. Somebody had said, hey, maybe you should get a coach. And I'll be honest with you, at the time, I really couldn't find one that had both the leadership development expertise that I was looking for, as well as the strong business acumen. And so I was frustrated about that. And one of my mentors, who also knew I wanted to start my own business, said, look, why don't you just solve the problem that you seem to have found? Why don't you become an executive coach? You have the business background, you have the strategy consulting acumen. Just go figure out what the coaching part is, right? And you do it. And I was like, okay. And he said, and if it doesn't work out for you, come back and I will offer you a position at my firm.
Right.
And that was 20 something years ago. And I never looked back. So it really came from a source of wanting to respond to a need that I had.
Yeah.
And I've been on the journey ever since. That's my story.
Our stories are so similar. I mean, it's crazy how many parallels there are. Your newest book, your second book, which you are the sole author of, your first book, you were the co-author, is called Leadership Unblocked, out in October of 2025. What does it look like for a leader to be blocked? And how do you know when they are?
Yeah. I think most people assume being blocked is that you're not a high performer or that you're not successful. And that in no way is what it is. I think you know that you're blocked when there's some dissonance between the impact that you're trying to make and actually what you're experiencing. And that can be from a business result standpoint, but it could also be just in terms of how you're feeling. My
Mhm.
experience that I shared about my origin story, sure, I was getting the business results and I was moving things forward, but again, boy, was I feeling challenged, and I just felt like there has to be an easier way than this. And oftentimes, right, I still wonder that sometimes. It's how I sort
Mhm.
of look at my life. And so being blocked is knowing that you are, quite frankly, not operating at your full effectiveness or your full performance or even your full capacity of the impact that you're able to have. So it doesn't necessarily mean that things are bad. It's just that you either know or others know or the situation says you have some more bandwidth or you have some more room where you
Mhm.
can grow and develop. And if something is keeping you stuck from moving to that next level.
You've been coaching for 20 plus years. What ballpark, at what percentage of the leaders you work with experience some degree of blockage?
100%.
100. So you are an expert in this.
100%. I
Yeah.
mean, I just, look, I don't know about you, Scott, but for me, I kind of want to work myself out of a job,
Uh-huh.
right?
Yeah.
And that is my goal when I work with folks. And so if they are working with me, it is because something is getting in their way. I think what I have found more and more of, particularly as I've coached more senior leaders and folks who, again, for all intents and purposes, are doing quite well from the outside, is that the things that are blocking them are not necessarily external, they are things internal.
Yeah.
And that is where we sort of, a lot of people don't come to the table saying that that's what's blocking them, but then we recognize that that is what it is, and then the work becomes much more of, as the cliche says, an inside game.
Yeah, totally. I mean, one of the things we both, are graduates of the coaching program at Georgetown, and I'm sure you remember as I do that one of the big things you learn there is Tim Galway's equation, capital P equals little p minus little I,
That's right.
right? Your
Mhm.
performance equals the potential minus the interference. And I talk about that so much in my work. And I always say that, interference comes in two flavors, extrinsic and intrinsic. And the
Mhm.
extrinsic
Yeah,
stuff you usually can't do anything about, right? It's all that
that's right.
external environment stuff that is a trigger for the intrinsic interference, that little wah, wah, wah voice in your head,
Yeah.
that I guess in your nomenclature is the voice of blockage. Is that true?
Yes, 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 they are. They're the beliefs that one carries,
Mm-hmm.
and when we think about beliefs, right? Like, I call them blockers because they block you, but I also call them hidden blockers because
Mm-hmm.
they're often not known to us, right? They're
Yeah.
so, like, they're just there and they've been there for so long, we don't even realize they're there. It's like that, the piece of mail that my kids step over for weeks on end on the floor. They don't even recognize it's there. I'm like, "It's right there.
that's
Why don't
that's
you
your
see it?"
extrinsic interference is the mail on the floor. When there are
Right,
triggers
right.
for you,
So
what's a trigger for you?
that's
Like,
right,
why
that's
don't
right,
you
and I
pick
think,
that up?
I think
Yeah.
a lot of the leaders that I work with, and by the way, I do this work on myself as well, is we tend to be very action biased or skill biased, and so if we see something that isn't working out, we either look at changing the external circumstance, the other through control, or we look at ourselves and say, "Okay, what can I change in terms of the way that I act or the way I behave, or I need to uplevel my skill?" And what
Hmm.
I'm suggesting here is, if in order for that to be sustainable, you also have to look at your beliefs, which, thank goodness, are malleable. And as I was describing to my daughter the other day, I said, beliefs are like clouds, right? Like, you're the sky and the beliefs can come and go, but also change shape. And we all have the
Hmm.
capacity to change the shape of
I
our
love that's a
beliefs.
beautiful metaphor. That's really good. Let's keep going on the blockers. I had a chance to see an advanced copy of your book, which thank you
Mm,
for that. Like you said, you've got 7 hidden blockers. There's a chapter for each of them in the book. I encourage people to go read it because it's great, great, great stuff. My personal favorite out of the 7 blockers you listed is I know I'm right. That's my favorite. Because we've both worked with a lot of clients who are probably like the smartest person in the room, that they're in, at least they think they are. And, maybe because of that, they can't get out of their own way. And like my favorite question in those situations for the client is like, would you rather be effective or would you rather be right? Because they're not necessarily the same thing. What do you do to help leaders who are blocked on the I'm right thing? How do you help them get past that and get through that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, similarly, it's the question that you asked, right? Would you rather be effective or be right? Because they often don't know the difference. They often believe that being effective, and this is where the belief comes in, right? They believe that being effective and that what makes them worthy or worthwhile or valued in their role, in their organization, in their meeting, whatever context we're talking about, means that they have to provide the answer, that they have the right answer. And what's tricky with these types of clients, and I'd love to hear your experience, is oftentimes, Scott, they are right. Right? Like oftentimes.
On a technical basis, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So the argument of like, well, maybe you'll find out something better doesn't actually stick because they typically have this like uncanny ability to see around corners and see things, 5 years, 10 years before they come down the pike. But the fact that they let that belief drive them then really results in behaviors like they're condescending or they kill the conversation or they take up all the space in the room, all the air in the room. So a big part of it, in terms of having them recognize it, is there often has to be some external cue that signals to them that something is off, whether it's feedback from someone else or the fact that they're not getting the results that they want, or they're feeling, very, very frustrated. And so then we have something we can work with, but then the work becomes them accepting that this is actually getting in their way. And that's probably the most difficult of it all.
Yeah. I think it's probably my favorite because it's the one when I was an executive that was probably a big blocker for me, and I thought I was right. I probably wasn't right a lot of the times that I thought I was, but I was pretty convinced, that I was right. And I think, and I see this a lot with my clients too, you get a straight line as the shortest distance between 2 points, except when it doesn't work for you to go in a straight line. It's like, what part of this do you not get is not a really connecting kind of question, for your colleagues.
Yeah.
And so, we have to, I keep going directly at it and I'm not getting anywhere by going directly at it. And like, come on, this is it, Yeah,
that's right.
Or if you are
getting somewhere, you are, in the case of the client that I highlight in the book, they're alienating a bunch of other folks that are critical to the role. So I think a big piece, back to your question around how do you get them to reframe it, is a big piece of it is reframing what does it mean to be effective in this role.
Yeah.
And is the largest variable being right? Again, no shade, or there's nothing wrong with wanting to be right, right? It's not that I say these beliefs are bad. It's more, if they're driving you right now, are they actually serving you being effective in the role that you're in or in the context that you're in? And if you are a leader where really your responsibility is not only to drive results, but to also build capacity within your organization and to gain alignment and to drive towards a vision, that belief as the driver is not then fulfilling a number of other parts of your mandate. And when they get that and they're like, oh, this is my mandate, therefore, what do I need to believe to be able to fulfill the full mandate? That is what changes the equation.
Yeah. And you asked in the middle of everything you just said, which all of it was very substantive for sure, but you asked a really important question, I think, in there, which is this serving you?
Yeah.
You talked in the book at some point about single loop learners, and that's another Georgetown thing that we learned, but didn't originate there, but that we teach it there. And you want to do the explanation of single loop and double loop learning?
Oh
since
my
you're the
gosh,
guest?
you're putting me on the spot.
No, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I mean, come on.
I tend to like really try to elementarize things as much
Yeah.
as possible, but single loop learning is you're sort of just looking at one way of learning, which is mainly from external circumstances, whereas double loop learning, you're also looking at what part do I play? And there's the
Yeah.
self-reflection piece that comes of it. What do I have to learn from this? What do I learn about myself in terms of how it impacts others or myself? So
Y-
it's double loop in terms of using the external to then
Yeah,
inform
that
us about
bigger,
the internal.
the double loop is bigger than the single loop, right? It encompasses
Mhm.
the single loop, right? And I would imagine you're a fan of Ron Heifetz and Marty Linsky and
Mhm.
adaptive leadership. And we'll
Mhm.
get all these little links and Coach Geek things in the show notes for people. But,
Mhm.
their great line about it is leaders need to be on the dance floor. They can be on the balcony. And
That's
it's
right.
important to
That's
alternate
right.
your perspective. And I always equate it to the single loop is that dance floor perspective, where
Mhm.
I can only see what's immediately in front of me.
Mhm.
On the balcony, that double loop, I can, if I take the time to do it and have the awareness, I guess, to do it.
Awareness, that's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And
So,
look, Scott, like what I'm always amazed by is, much of what we're talking about, you named some of the folks behind it, is not new and is actually widely used outside of the business world and the corporate world. And so I think, part of my mission in even writing a book like this is to bring some of this, very much universal knowledge and wisdom and skills and talent and learning into more of a corporate conversation because
yeah.
there's no reason why it's not applicable in
Well,
these
and you have a
situations
real
as well.
gift, as demonstrated through this conversation, but also through your writing. You have a real gift for making it simple and making it practical for people and not theoretical. Take the theory and turn it into something you
Mhm.
can use, and you're very gifted with that. I want to
Oh,
ask one
thank
more
you.
question about the new book.
Sure.
My favorite blocker was I Know I'm Right. Do you have a favorite blocker of the other six?
Oh,
Which?
goodness. So I'm gonna be really honest here, right? Because I set out writing this book and I was like, "Oh, I know I need to be involved as my main one," and other people have attested to it.
Uh huh.
And then as I was writing it, it was writing this book and, there's these 7 chapters and each of the beliefs come from I looked over, 300 of my clients to kind of find a pattern, and these were the 7 that bubbled up. So they're not the only ones, but they're the ones that bubbled up. And I was writing the book, and this book got written primarily between 4 and 7 AM in the morning, which is when I had to fit it in.
Nice.
It was such a cathartic experience, Scott, because every time I would be like, "Oh my god, I've done this. This belief lives within me as
Mm-hmm.
well." And so then it was like, yeah, which one is my favorite? I would say the one that was most surprising, I'll reframe it a little bit. The one that was most surprising was the "If I can do it, so can you."
Oh yeah.
Because so often that, we hear that said so many times and it is said as an inspiration, a motivation, right? You think you're motivating people by believing that like if I can do this, so can you. And in a way, yes, it can be motivating at times, but it can also be so limiting because you are doing the behavior that results out of that is expecting others to behave exactly as you behave in order to get the results that you got,
Mm-hmm.
which goes completely against, right? Management 101 when you're trying to develop people and build capacity or even managing change, right? You just look at that change curve. You got to meet people where they are.
Mm-hmm.
And so that
Totally.
belief of if I can do it, so can you, immediately takes you away from meeting people where they are and instead puts you in your posture and says, you've got to meet me here and do as I say. And that's how we're going to define your success.
Yeah, totally. I mean, and you use the word behavior, like you've got to behave the way I'm behaving. I would add to that, you've got to think the way I'm thinking, right?
Hmm.
You've got to have the same
Hmm.
perspective that I have, even
Hmm.
though what informs your perspective is completely different than what informs my perspective. I mean, there's,
That's right.
it's just like, you know, again, it's probably a close cousin of I'm right, because,
Hmm.
you've, I think what both of those have in common, I think is, I'd love to have you push back on this if you don't agree or add to it or whatever, but I'm right. And if I can do it, so can you kind of stem from my information set.
That's right.
You know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Just from
Yeah.
a different framing. I mean, the if I can do it, so can you. I'm reminded of someone that I heard speak years ago, and he said something that really stuck with me. He said, "If you want my glory," which he was talking about his results. He said, "If you want my glory, you've got to take the whole story."
Huh.
Meaning
That's a good
you've
line.
got to start from you've got to go through everything that I went through
Mm.
in order to be able to then get these results because it's my story. And
Mhm.
I think that actually what he was saying is don't assume, don't believe that if I can do this way, so can you. You've got to figure out your way of getting
Mhm.
there. And so, when we think about managers and we say, hey, when you delegate work, think about the what, not the how. Tell them the what, not the how. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
But if you're saying, "Hey, the way that I do it is the way," then you're gonna say, "That's the way you should do it," and it goes against that.
Yeah. So, kind of wrapping up the unblocked part of our conversation, what's your one small step or one best piece of advice for a listener who's thinking, oh my gosh, I'm blocked on something? And what's the baby step they can start with to get unblocked?
Yeah, I think the baby step, quite frankly, is if you find yourself in any situation where, again, you're either feeling frustrated or blocked or stuck or whatever word you wanna use, is to just ask yourself, "What am I thinking right now that's contributing to how I feel and how I'm acting in this situation?" We tend to focus on how I feel and how I'm acting, but we don't say, "What am I thinking right now? What's going through my head? What am I believing?" Right? About myself, about the other, or about the situation. So identify it and then back to, what we were talking about earlier, is that helping you right now?
Mhm. Is it serving you? Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, very good. So the premise of this show, Best Ever, is that
Mhm.
better self-management leads to better leadership outcomes.
Mm.
And you've coached in a lot of different venues, corporate, nonprofit, government. Do you see any common self-management challenges that cut across all those different sectors that leaders typically face in
Yes.
self-management?
I mean, that cut across all those different sectors, all types of different leaders. Can I say even beyond leadership, right?
Mhm.
Across people,
Mhm.
right? I think the basic piece that ends up missing is just the sometimes lack of ability and then resistance to being able to be honest with oneself. And the honest with oneself is around just how how you are, how you behave, how you think, or even about your circumstance, or even about the level of, in certain situations, it's the level of power and control that you actually have. And so not being able to see reality for what it is. And as a result, then, you really can't act effectively unless you see things clearly. And
Hmm.
when we can't see things clearly, it gets in the way. And so I often find as a coach, probably the biggest thing that I'm doing is helping my clients see the situation or themselves or the other more clearly than they did previously, right?
Mhm.
And a lot of times, Scott, what they're seeing more clearly are the choices and the options that they have in front of them, rather than just seeing it as there's just one way. And that to
Mhm.
me is self management, right? Self management is recognizing I see things clearly, I have options in front of me. And now, because I see things clearly, I can make an informed choice, loosely held choice about how I move forward, whether it be with a vision, a strategy, or how I coach somebody on my team, or how I have that conversation, or how I present this idea, or whether I speak up in a meeting or not.
How do you know if you're seeing things clearly? You may, I think I am, but turns out I was wrong, or I thought I was, but now I realize I
Yeah,
wasn't. How do you know in the
yeah.
moment whether you're thinking and seeing things clearly?
I think a telltale sign, is they sort of live on the polar opposites of each other, right? I think if you are so convinced that what you're seeing is it, right?
Mhm.
It is said internally or externally with such assertion and conviction that there is no other way. you likely aren't seeing it clearly, because it probably means you didn't kick the tire against it enough. And then there's the other side, the polar side of opposite side of it, which is like you're waffling and you can't quite see. And there's, it's one day you're this, the next second you're that, or I don't know. There's a lot of I don't know, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. Then even there, it's fuzzy. So if it's crystal clear, you're probably not seeing it clearly. And if it's really fuzzy, you're not seeing it clearly. And here's why. Every situation has different angles to be able to look at. So to me, seeing something clearly is actually being able to see all different sides of it, not being able just to see one or not being able to see any.
Okay, so I'd love to talk about how to help either ourselves, if I'm doing some self-coaching here, or if I'm lucky enough to have a great external coach like you, and I want to get better and better and better over time at seeing things clearly. Another premise that I kind of operate from, both in this show and just in life in general, is first thing is I want to be able to show up at something that looks like my best case performance as much as I can. Like I want to operate kind of at my peak when it's helpful to do that. And if I'm doing that, my outcomes that I'm influencing are probably going to be better because I'm showing up better. And in between those two things are routines, right? Routines that help me be better. And because they help me show up more at my best more often, then the outcomes in turn are better. So mental routines, self observation routines that can help people be increasingly good at self recognition and seeing it clearly. What do you recommend?
Yeah.
What's worked?
Absolutely. As a practice, or as a routine. So I think that let's sort of start with the intent first, how you walk in or how you view, right? Because I'm looking at a painting in front of me as we're talking, right? How I view that painting really depends on what my posture is as I'm looking at it. And it's the same when you're a leader. And I think that the posture of curiosity is what lends itself to then being able to see things more clearly, because you're questioning, you're asking. And so what does that look like in real terms? If I'm with a client, or what I encourage my clients to do is when they have a situation, let's say there's something with one of their team members going on and the performance isn't up to par, ask yourself, here's what I think. What else might be going on here? That's just a curiosity question. What else might be going on? What else might be true here? Right? What else might be contributing to this? And all it's doing is sort of testing the operating hypothesis. That's the other thing, is assume everything that you hold is a hypothesis rather than the conclusion. Start with the hypothesis in mind rather than a conclusion. And that little practice of just asking yourself those questions can be very helpful in just opening up the aperture, if you will. Now, the ability to do that, I think, requires a certain level of discipline, which there are underlying routines that you can go through outside of those situations, or rituals, if you will, that then help build your ability to do that in the moment.
Yeah.
Such as meditation.
Right. Sure. To slow it down enough so you're not so reactive. Yeah. The big takeaway for me in what you just said is what else? What else could it be? What else could be happening here? What else? And I like to focus, I'm sure you do too. I like to help clients focus on things that I always describe as relatively easy to do and likely to make a difference. It's relatively easy, I think, to train yourself to ask what else, right? Two-word question.
Yep.
What else could it be? What else?
Yep. Absolutely.
And so over time, maybe it does make a difference, right? It slows me down enough to, I'm not so damn certain that there's only one way of looking at it. I'm right, or you need to do it the way I would do it, or whatever the blocker is.
Yeah. And what's fascinating to me, Scott, is that, so as you said, it's such a simple question, and yet I sometimes feel resistance myself to asking what else. And when I've asked myself, and I see it in my clients, we're so concerned we're going to lose control of our agenda by just exploring hypothetically that there might be something else going on that we don't. right? I was sharing this with a client the other day as we were working through this. And I said, look, if you went to the doctor and you went into the doctor and you said, "Oh my God, doctor, I have a pain," would you want the doctor to just say, "This is it. This is the issue, and that's what we're going to
Yeah.
treat"? Or would you want the doctor to be like, what else might be going on? Right? Let me look at that. Let me question that. Let's sort of test out what other things might be going on that's contributing. And he was like, "I'd want the latter." I said, "Okay. So what if you approached your situation in that way? What do you
Yeah.
have to lose?"
Yeah. It's really
Right?
interesting. I mean, like, do you want a doctor who looks at the body as a system and things are interrelated and connected? Or do you want a doctor who, I'm a specialist in arms, so I'm going to look at your arm, or whatever it might
Yeah.
be? Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And if leaders are called to do anything, quite frankly, it's to look at things from a systems standpoint.
Yeah, and it kind of relates to another point that you make in your work, and I think we both learned it at Georgetown from. He was definitely a mentor to me. I don't know if he was a mentor to you, Frank Ball, who was one of the
Oh, yes.
founding faculty members at Georgetown. And
Very much so.
one of Frank's favorite teaching points was, okay, we can coach the problem or we can coach the person. And we're going to make more progress if we coach the person, make more of an impact. And you, in your work, you describe it as working from the inside out. We've been talking about looking at things systemically, a lot of different things. What's your go-to move as a coach and working with your clients on shifting from that external problem focus to what's my contribution either
Yeah.
to the existing
I
problem
mean,
or to fixing this problem?
yeah, because, let me caveat this by saying, like, if you asked any of my friends or people who work closely with me, like, I'm a bias for action type of girl, right? Like, I'm all about the action. And
Yeah.
so even though we might do a little bit of the muckety muck on the inside out, right, on the inside game, we are going to get to some actions at some point. But to answer your question, I don't necessarily have a technique to move them to the inside because I think that the client will move to the inside when they are ready to
Yeah.
move to the inside, and it will happen. So, one of the things that is really important to me as a coach, and this is my approach to coaching, I'm not here to say this is the way to coach at all, is about meeting the client where they are. And not everyone is, if you just look at adult development theory, right? Not everyone's ready to do that. A lot of people are just still on the, on like the skills based that I got to build some skills and I have to focus on the external. So it is for those clients who developmentally are ready. And oftentimes I find that they will go there just not because I'm trying to move them there, just by a certain question that I might ask. And that's what comes up. And that to me is way more powerful than any type of move or strategy or tactic that I can use. So I just try to facilitate uh, their own questioning, their answers, their choices. At the end of the day, I just want them to see that they have choices in front of them. One of the choices is to stay focused on the external, the other choice is to go on the internal, and then there's the hybrid choice, or there's a choice of doing nothing. Which one do you want? Where are we going? And they lead the way.
Yeah, I love that. And what's the likely impact of any choice
Yeah.
you might make, right? I mean,
Yeah. I mean, Scott,
play it
I'll
out.
tell you, I
Yeah.
remember when I first when I first landed in coaching, right? And I told you I sort of fell into this. I didn't know what coaching was about. And I went to before Georgetown, I went to another coaching school or class, which will remain unnamed. And that first weekend or course, they were very much going for like right away for the inside, right? Like they wanted you to come to and I wasn't there. Like that's not where I was. And I just had this, you know, just visceral reaction to what was happening. And what they did is they misread my readiness to be in that in that type of situation for coaching. It was not where the level at which I was going to coach at. The way I coach now is not how I coached 20 years ago because I did not have the capacity for it.
Yeah.
I left that program and went to Georgetown, which had a lot more skill based, et cetera, which is what I needed at that moment. And so I think the same holds true when we coach others. We have to be really, really careful of, getting excited about trying to get these inside breakthrough moments when that might not be where the client is, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
the leader. And the same if you're a manager coaching an individual. It kind of goes back to that belief, like, if I can do it, so can you. No, that's not true. Like, meet them where they are in terms of readiness and work with that.
Mm-hmm. You just brought up something about your coaching style has changed. I want to I want to segue off of that to your podcast, Coaching Real Leaders.
Yes.
And I've got a question for you
Hmm.
after I make a request. I've got a question for you about what shifted for you in the 4.5 years you've been doing the podcast. But before I ask you that, for real, for folks who haven't heard Coaching Real Leaders, tell them what the premise of the show is and how it works.
Yeah. So the show is I have real people that I coach in a one-time session, which is very different than my regular go-to coaching, which happens over the span of time.
Mm-hmm.
And they're real individuals, and I do a coaching session with them, and we record it, and then we let the people hear the coaching session, right?
Yeah.
I thought, maybe we can do this for coaching. Maybe we can, pull the curtain back a bit and let people in. And if they can relate to the story, if one person can relate to the story and it helps them in some way, then the job is done. And
Yeah.
that was, 10 seasons ago.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have a moment or a couple of moments that have stuck with you the most from
Mm.
folks you've talked with on the show?
There's 2 that sort of thematically run through the whole course. I think first is I had to grapple with my own vulnerability to put my coaching out on blast like that. I was very, very concerned early on that I would get, you know, judged by the coaching community, and people would say that's bad coaching, and this I had all this internal dialogue that I had to work through. And some people do say that. You just, look at the Apple reviews. There are some people who say, "Oh my god, what's happening here?" And what I had to, again, to the point of beliefs, I had to sort of say, okay, the belief that drives me here is that this is going to help someone. And if it helps one person, then my mission is done. And that is what drives me. So just doing the own work around what was blocking me from really doing something that's a passion project versus anything else has been hugely moving for me. I think the second is, even though I don't have the luxury of coaching these people over a span of time, recognizing that even in a 1 hour, hour and a half, 2 hour conversation, there is some shift that happens, but there have been some conversations where I've shifted too. I learn as much from my clients as they believe they learn from me. And I remind them of that all the time. Like, it's kind of the best job in the world because it's so reciprocal.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do it in that level of intensity, where you gotta kind of put everything out the window, like the show is not scripted. I don't know anything going in cold. I go in cold, and we say, okay, just make believe that the microphone is not here. Other than that, it's a real coaching session. The change that's able to happen has helped me understand that I have the capacity to shift, but not only that, anyone has the capacity to shift if they can also just not only get coaching externally, but also learn how to coach themselves.
I love that. You're just anticipating all the things I wanted to ask you. I mean, so one, let's go deeper on one of them. How do you think it's changed the way you coach?
I think it's allowed me to be a little bit freer in my coaching, right? Like, I get so much feedback that I typically would not get because, again, when I coach my regular clients, it's just me and them. I don't get anyone saying, "Oh my gosh, here's what you did. Here's what you did." But now I get it on blast. Like, and I have a community of folks who really are into the show, and we do live debriefs of the episodes, and they give me feedback. They ask me questions. They say, "Oh, what did you do here?" It gives me, and then for the coaching episodes to be recorded, and I listen to them,
Yeah.
and there are times when I'll say, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe I said that." But then there are other times, to be honest, where I'm like, "Oh, like, that was some pretty damn good coaching." Right?
Yeah.
Um, for that moment, but I never take it seriously,
Mm-hmm.
I don't overly identify with anything. I'm not overly attached to the show. I'm not overly attached to results. But what it has allowed me to be free because so many times freer, because so many times we don't end up where we thought we would end up or where the client thought we would end up, but it's still manifested itself in something positive. And so having that belief that like you don't have to always have a well thought out plan for things to end up okay
Mhm.
is probably has been my lifelong struggle. And so seeing it manifest in this show has been truly helpful for me.
Well, you just alluded to the next question I wanted to ask, which when you said lifelong struggle, I was going to say, I asked you how it changed you as a coach, and how about
Yeah.
as a human? How do you think, all these different
Yeah.
conversations that are public conversations, people are listening to them, and you're on kind of on the
Yeah.
griddle there. How's that changed you
Yeah.
as a person?
I don't know if it's changed me so much, Scott. I think it's expanded me in some ways. I think it's allowed me to bring out parts of me that I've probably sort of shooed off to the side for a long time for a number of different reasons, right? And I'm still very discerning around how to do it. I always say like my comfort zone is being it's no wonder I became an executive coach, right? Like my comfort zone is being the behind the scenes person,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, back at you.
And it just so happens that I'm expressing that as being an executive coach, but I always said if I wasn't an executive coach, I'd probably either be a chief of staff or a phenomenal executive assistant, right? But I think what it has allowed me to do, or the way that it has expanded me, is to give myself permission and motivate me to be out in the world a bit more. But what drives me there is not because I want to be out there, it's because I know it's helping others. And so I found that I find a lot more motivation to come out front when it's serving others rather than when it's just serving myself, right? That's not a good or bad. That's just the belief I need to hold right now in order to be able to do work. And that I find that the show has given me a lot more courage and confidence to do that.
Again, you're just leading the witness here, as far leading the questioner, I would say. Your other book that you wrote several years ago with Amy Jen Sue is Own the Room. Give us the two-sentence synopsis of what Own the Room's all about. I could say it, but I'd rather hear you say it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So Own the Room was really a book around leadership presence and how you build it, right?
Mhm.
And it came out of the fact that so many of our clients that we've been working with would receive feedback that they needed to improve or enhance their leadership presence. But then when you would ask people like, oh, well, what does that mean? Nobody had any clue. And so Amy and I set out back then to sort of define what leadership presence is, which we saw as the intersection of not only being able to have a voice for yourself, but also being able to have a voice for others, that credibility and relatability aspect.
Mhm.
And we created a framework for how one can develop the aptitude to consistently have that type of leadership presence through 3 levels of conditioning, which one of them was mental conditioning.
Mhm.
And so it's no surprise. I actually feel like the current book, Leadership Unblocked, is a deep dive on one of the levers that you can pull in order to be able to have effective leadership presence. And the other two was the physical conditioning and the skill conditioning,
Got
the
it.
external pieces.
So you wrote that book how long ago?
It came out in 2013.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
I
So
swore I would never write
yeah,
another book.
I know what you mean by that. I saw your LinkedIn post about that and could completely
Oh my
relate.
God.
As you're, with all the experience you've had since then in different ways, podcast and the work you're doing and the writing and thinking you're doing, living life, has your view on leadership presence changed since
It
2013?
has.
Yeah, like
It
what's
has.
changed?
There's been yeah, I mean, there've been many times when I've wanted to go back and I'm not gonna do it, but, like, rewrite certain aspects. I think I was not as much of a I'm still not a systems person, like, I'm very clear, I'm not somebody who's gonna come in and try to change the system in your organization and culture. However, I feel like I have a lot more system awareness than I had back
Mm,
then. And I wish that I could go back and point out more how the system might actually impact your leadership presence, not to give it power over it, right? But to actually acknowledge that the way that leadership presence has been defined in some areas is driven more by kind of cultural conditioning and systemic conditioning, a very westernized conditioning,
Mm-hmm.
rather than what it truly is. So we sort of winked at it, but we weren't as direct about it. And the 2025 version of Muriel would be way more direct about it
What would you
than I
say?
was back then.
How would you
Say, look,
summarize it?
I would say that, look, for the most part, the culture that we see in a lot of corporate, and I will say primarily America, right? But Western society is based on a particular model, which tends to be the white male patriarchal model.
Mm-hmm.
And that is not constructed for those who do not look or who don't operate that way. It isn't necessarily constructed for us to succeed. So I would have acknowledged that and then says, but that said, right, let's talk about what part you can own, what is within your control around how you navigate that, knowing that it's a choice that you have to make. Okay. That it is a choice. You do not have to do it. But here's the reality of it. So I would have been, as I mentioned before, I think seeing things clearly and stating them clearly is fundamentally very important in order to be able to have agency and have a choice.
Yeah.
And so acknowledging it, to me, there's a difference between acknowledging something and agreeing with it. I may not agree with the system, but I have to at least acknowledge it. So I would have spoken about it from that standpoint. And then the other standpoint I would have spoken about it from is, if you are somebody where your style, your approach actually meshes well with that, with that culture or that way of doing things, is it something that you want to perpetuate, or do you
Right.
want to be open to other ways that
Expand it.
people can show
Yeah.
up? Exactly.
Yeah.
Expand that still will make you feel like somebody is credible and relatable, which at the end of the
Mm-hmm.
day is all that we define when we feel like we are in the presence of a leader, right? That is what we feel. They are credible and relatable. And so really it's, can I change my own formula about what that actually means and what it looks like?
I think there's a great LinkedIn course for you to do, and what you just said.
Oh goodness.
It's the LinkedIn course sequel to Own the Room.
Oh gosh.
Because if you think about it, what you covered in the book with Amy, what you covered are basic building blocks that people need, right?
Mm-hmm.
No matter no matter what system you're operating in, there's some basics. One of the guests we've had on the show is a guy named Dane Blanton, and Dane is he's an Olympic gold medalist in beach volleyball, and he's the coach of the women's beach volleyball team at USC Southern Cal, and they've won 4 national championships in a row so far. And he's really an amazing guy. And we were talking about how much of it is mindset and how much of it is technical skill. And he said, well, you got to have the technical skill. And so we just practice that and practice that and practice that until it's automatic, right? Yeah. And then we can get into the mindset of it. And
that's right.
And I kind of analogize that to what we're just talking about with leadership presence. The Own the Room skill set is Dane's version of, hitting the volleyball with your forearms, right? You got to know how to do that, right? And then
that's right.
We can talk about how to take it to another level, expand it,
create
opportunities, influence the opportunity set, the system that you're in, all of that. One last question on presence. Speaking of systems, and I don't want to embarrass you by saying this, but one of the systems you're operating in these days is you've become something of a public figure, right? I mean, you talked about, I love the way your eyes went right there. And you've got people who are followers of you on, on the Coaching Real Leaders podcast and the community of people and this and that. How do you think your presence has evolved or changed since you've become more and more publicly visible and known?
Yeah. Probably not much, Scott, because like I said, I don't know, a mentor of, not mentor, a teacher of mine, once told me, Muriel, there's a thin line between optimism and denial.
That's a great line. So say more about that.
I think what you're experiencing here is I see things in this realm around this public thing, I'm kind of like in denial, right? And so I'm like, well, I don't know if I really see it. It's clearly something I'm not seeing clearly. And
Hmm.
maybe others are seeing it differently than I do. I think there's a part of me, a huge part of me that sees the risk of becoming too attached to this notion of being a public figure, that it would probably feed a part of me that I don't really want to feed, that I
Hmm.
know is there. It's the same reason why, when my partner and I were deciding where to live when we were in our early 20s, the choice was between living where we live now or living in a much more intense place. And I consciously I kinda made the decision back then that I didn't wanna live there because I knew it would bring out what was in me, which was hyper competitive,
Mm-hmm.
type quadruple A, being part of the rat race, and I'm like, "I can do that naturally. I don't need to be in the context to do that." Right? So why put
Hmm.
myself in the fire? And that's what I feel now. I kind of know that if I attach myself to that, it may, unless I develop some other skills and some other levels of awareness, which clearly I'm not ready for, it may bring something out. So I sort of resist it. So I don't think it's necessarily changed anything in me, right? I sort of
Hmm.
just keep focused on as long as I am treating people, hopefully with kindness, and treating them in a way that I can still be authentic and I still feel good about what I'm doing. I don't feel like I'm being performative, then I'm good. I think the minute I start feeling like I'm being performative and this doesn't align with what I feel where I can make an impact or the purpose of what I'm doing, then I'm out. I don't wanna do it anymore because I
Right.
think that's a slippery slope that I don't wanna be a part of.
Yeah. That's a very grounded way to think about it, I would say. That's my assessment, as we would say at
Thank you,
Georgetown.
Scott. That
Yeah,
goes a
so
long way. I
no, no.
love that assessment.
Thank you, yeah. I know we have taken up all too much of your time already. I wanna just wrap up with a
Oh,
couple of
so
questions. I
mhm.
appreciate you sharing, some of your personal reflections, as it's hard for coaches to do, to talk about themselves, and,
Yeah.
I appreciate you doing that. So, I talked earlier about, routines that help you show up at your best. What are your go-to routines for you personally, physical, mental,
Yeah.
relational, spiritual, that kind of help you stay as grounded as you just expressed,
Yeah.
but just help you, show up how you want to show up.
Yeah.
What's helping?
Um, I think there are a couple. First of all, I work out. I mean, I work out probably at minimum 5 times a week.
Hmm.
It's a ritual of mine.
What's your
I
workout? What
just
do you
have to
do?
have it. I walk with my weighted vest on uphill on my treadmill. I do a little run walk every now and then. I have a Peloton bike. And then I just started back up a hot yoga practice that I
Oh,
had stopped during the pandemic. And so I'm doing back to doing that a couple times a week. And again, talk about change, like how I was doing it, 8, 9 years ago versus how I'm doing it now is completely different. And I think it's because of the way my mindset towards it.
on the yoga?
So on the yoga. Yeah.
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 Say more
Yeah.
about that. How do you describe the difference?
Um, I had this moment that I keep coming back to. I remember the first time I went, it was the first time that I experienced in hot yoga where I just couldn't do it. Like, I remember because up until that point, yeah, I was all about, like, getting the postures, making it through. And there was this moment where about 10 minutes into the class, I just couldn't do it. And I remember the teacher had said, "The one thing you can't do is leave. You stay." And I just lay down in shavasana for the next 80 minutes of the class, literally. Now, for me, type A, high achiever, watching everybody do the moves and me just laying on the ground was like, ugh. But I remember I had this moment about 60 minutes in where it was like this voice that just said, "This is the purpose. You just stay in it
Hmm.
no matter what's happening." And that's how I approach it now, right? I'm going to meet myself wherever I am when I walk into the studio. And I try to pay attention to the aversions because there are a lot of them. I do not
Hmm.
like hot, sweaty people close to me, but there I am.
Hmm. Sweating on
And
each
I
other.
try
Hmm.
exactly, and
Mm.
I just sort of every time that happens, I'm just like, "Muriel, it just is. It's not good or bad, it just is." And
Mhm.
so it is such a mental practice for me
Yeah.
that then gets manifested in the body. And I'm not attached to any of the outcomes. I'm just there. So
Mhm.
that is something I've been incorporating this year, with a lot more discipline. I do have a meditation practice, and I have to say I fought meditation for many, many, many years. I just couldn't stand even people saying that they meditate. And I started practicing what's known as Vipassana meditation
Mhm.
about 8 years ago because I was following somebody who I hugely admire, and she said that's what she did, and I was like, oh well, if that's what she does, maybe it's what I should do. And I tried
Explain
it.
the essence of Vipassana,
Yeah, so
please.
Vipassana meditation, I'm drawn to. It's also called insight meditation in
Mhm.
the Western world. It literally is just focusing on the breath.
Mhm.
Uh, there's no guiding, there's no music, there's no nothing, there's no special way of breathing. You just focus on your breath. And what I love about that is that when we think about it, your breath is actually the only thing that tethers you to life,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
It's the only thing that's actually present in this moment. There is 3 parts. It's simple. There's the inhalation, the exhalation, and then the little pause in between. And what I find is that the practice is not so much in the meditation, but um, being able to spend that time doing that and being curious, not so much about staying focused on the breath, but being curious and actually celebrating every time I realize that I have left the breath, which happens most of the time,
Sure.
and my ability to come back
Mhm.
to the breath is where for me I'm like, okay, that's there's always room to course correct. There's always room to come back to home. There's always room to come back to baseline. So it is a practice now. I mean, it's the first thing I do when I come downstairs every morning, even if, I try to do, even if all I can fit in is 5 minutes.
Yeah.
But then I try to practice it through the day just as if
Just the
I'm in
breath.
conversation and I feel myself just coming back to me, because recognizing that this is home, this is where I'm safe.
What's been in your ears lately? In other words, like, what are you listening to that's inspiring you or shaping your thinking or just as fun?
Mm. So I'm going to be very honest here. So there is, and I can't recall her name. I wish I could because I would give her credit. There is I guess she's a meditation teacher or guide on the Insight meditation app
That's what I use.
who has
Yeah.
who has a 20-minute, I'll send it to you afterwards. A 20-minute affirmation called I am here.
Hmm.
And I listen to it often.
Hmm.
Often. Sometimes when I'm driving in my car, if I'm going out on a walk, I just listen to it because even though I have probably listened to it 100 times at this point, I hear something different every single time,
Wow.
and it says exactly what I need to hear at that time,
That's
right?
awesome. Yeah.
So
Please
that is
send me the
probably the
link and
thing
we'll
that
put
has
that in the
been.
show notes
I
too.
will. I
Yeah.
will. I will certainly. So
That must be
that's what I
amazing.
would name right now.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And here's um, other than my little administrative question at the end, you're the only guest that I've asked this question of, because it's such a coachy question to ask. What have I not asked you that I should have asked or that you wished I'd asked,
Oh,
Muriel? Any other
goodness.
questions that we need to get out there?
What am I looking forward to?
Yeah. What are you looking forward to? Let's hear that.
See, I wanted you to ask me that because I'm probably asking myself that. So, I am looking forward to so I have 2 kids going off to college this fall. And so I've been, it's that bittersweet moment where your life is about to have a lot less structure than it used to. So I'm looking forward to what that looks like, in terms of just being able to have more spaciousness,
Mm-hmm.
et cetera. And I'm also looking forward to I was reflecting with on people keep asking you, "Oh, are you gonna miss them? Are you gonna miss them?" And I realized, I was like, "Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna miss them. I, like, love my kids. I like my kids." I said, "But the thing that I realize I'm gonna miss the most is that they have created moments of joy." They laugh all the time. They fill the house with laughter. They make me laugh even when I don't want to. And yeah, I mean, they really do. I am looking forward to teaching myself to create those moments of laughter for myself rather than relying on them or
Uh-huh.
anyone else to do so.
Yeah. You are
Yeah,
your own laugh source. Yeah.
that's right. That's right. That's right.
I look forward to hearing how that goes. I hope you'll share that
Mhm.
somewhere. give us all the coordinates for your work, for your book, for your
Sure.
podcast, every coordinate that you want people to be aware of, please.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you can find all the things at murielwilkins.com. I post on LinkedIn quite a bit, so you can find me at
You're a good
Muriel
poster.
Wilkins at LinkedIn, and then on Instagram at Coach Muriel Wilkins.
Thank you so much for doing this and for geeking out with me and going deep and having fun and laughing. See, you're doing a great job already. You're your own source of laughter.
Oh my goodness, I'm practicing.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It's been a
Scott.
real pleasure and a joy to talk with you, Muriel. Thanks so much.
Likewise. So grateful for our time together.
If I think about the coachable moments that I'm taking away from Muriel, I would sum up maybe 3 points under the rubric, or not really a rubric, under the word curiosity, because I think that's kind of a theme in Muriel's work. And I'm not really sure that she actually used that word, but so much of Muriel's approach to coaching and the work that she does with her clients on her show, Coaching Real Leaders, in her books, the new book, Leadership Unblocked, the latest example, is about staying curious and asking the questions that help you be more effective. This show Best Ever is about the connection between self-management and positive leadership outcomes, connecting those two things, that if you're managing yourself more effectively, it's more likely that the leadership outcomes you're going to get are going to be better. And I think managing yourself so that you have a level of curiosity about what's going on in your environment and in your world and your place and your role in all of that is a big, big aspect of self-management. And 3 takeaways for me on how to do that, how to stay curious and grow through curiosity, develop yourself, and raise your level of effectiveness in self-management. 3 things that I'm taking away from Muriel. 1 is get in the habit, get in the routine of asking yourself, what else? Muriel brought that up. It's one of my favorite questions as well. What else could this be? What else could be going on here? What else have I missed? Just what else by itself is a great question to ask yourself and to ask others, to get you out of your preconceived notions, to get you out of your confirmation bias, to get you out of your presumptions. And so, number 1, get in the habit of asking variations of the question, what else? My second big takeaway, coachable moment takeaway from the conversation with Muriel, among so many that I could list, but the second one for this purpose is remember that we're operating, that you're operating, I'm operating, we're all operating in a system of other people. And that system could be your workplace and your colleagues there. That system could be your community. That system could be your family. There's a whole school of therapy called family systems therapy. There's a reason that the word systems is in that term, family systems therapy. You are a part of a system, and systems theory and systems practice really tells us that when you change one part of the system, you change the entire system. And so observe yourself in that system. Observe the impact that you're having. That kind of leads to the third point. How do you, first understand that you're in a system. That's the second takeaway from Muriel. And third, work on observing your impact, staying curious about your impact within that system. She talked a good bit when people get blocked as leaders and get blocked as people. It's because they kind of get into such a deep groove or such a deep rut, really, that they can't see anything else as an alternative. And the really interesting point that she made is probably my words, not hers, but I think this is the point she was making. There's data all around us. If you're on a path and it's not working, you're getting a lot of resistance. That's data. If you're feeling uncertain, maybe you're not locked in on a path. You just don't know what to do next, and you're kind of unsettled. That's data. Pay attention to that. If everybody's agreeing with you all the time and we have unanimous consent, that's data. probably a warning signal, but it's data. And Muriel talked about, there's polls where everybody agrees with everybody on the one end, and you're just completely uncertain about what to do next on the other end. And we're trying to bring it back towards the middle of the spectrum. That's probably where the truth is, for one thing. That's probably where effectiveness lies for another, is somewhere in the middle, and not getting locked into one end of the spectrum or the other. And so observe yourself within the spectrum, observe yourself within the system, pay attention to the data. Like I said, this is pretty heady stuff compared to a lot of the conversations we've had on Best Ever. It's not like, here are 3 simple things you can do. What I'm asking you to think about is being curious and asking what else, thinking about your role in the system, and then observing the impact of you in the system. So some pretty chewy, nutritious mental routines that you can work on for yourself from Muriel Wilkins. So if you were learning a lot from the conversation, if it made you think a lot, if you're taking some things away and you want to learn more and do more with Muriel's work, her one-stop shop is murielwilkins.com. Her book, again, coming out in fall of 2025, is Leadership Unblocked. It's a great book. If you enjoyed the conversation, you'll enjoy the book. If you found today's conversation valuable, be sure to follow Best Ever on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review and a comment on this episode. I want to know what's landing with you, and your engagement really helps others discover the show. And if you're looking for more on how self-management fuels lasting leadership impact, connect with me through eblingroup.com. I've learned it takes a village to make a podcast. Thanks to executive producer Cece Huffman and editor Mark Meyer, both of Wavestream Media. And thanks to my other team members, Lindsay Russell, Mary Moats, Sophia Shum, and Diane Eblin. Best Ever is a production of the Eblin Group. Thanks for listening to Best Ever. And until next time, keep taking those small steps that lead to your best ever outcomes.